Okay guys, so now you can see here, I want to show you guys I was in ctutorial.h right here, and now I'm in ctutorial.c, and so I've included ctutorial.h, so I have all those structures. I've also included standard IO and assert, because assert statements are good for arrow checking. So now we're going to make our first method here, and our first method is going to be called list init. And what it's going to do is it's going to initialize the list. So I'm going to make a struct, and it's going to be called list, and it's going to take a list pointer. Well, I'm not going to make a struct, but I'm going to declare it as my parameter. And then inside the body here, what we're going to do is we're going to initialize the list. So I'm going to initialize the head and tail pointer nodes. And so the way we're going to do that is I'm going to do list. Since it's a pointer, I use arrow syntax, head, and I'm going to say dot next because the head is not a pointer, remember, semicolon at the end. And then it's going to be, the next is going to equal list head previous. So initially when the list is created, previous cannot be resolved. Tail, sorry, I called it tail, not previous. And so basically what I'm saying is that the next of the head should be pointing to the tail, which makes sense when it's an empty linked list. The head is pointing to the tail, and the tail can go backwards to the head. And so something I'm also going to do is it's impossible for the head to go backwards, so I'm just going to make sure that we understand that it's not filled with a junk value that I say the previous of the head is equal to null. And then so also what I'm going to do here is now we're going to initialize the tail. So the tail is going to have the previous equal list head. And then it's going to have, the tail should not be able to go to the next node. The tail shouldn't have a next, so I'm going to set that to null. And just for good arrow checking, if you haven't seen my video on assert statements, maybe I'll have it in the description below. I can simply say list does not equal null. I'm just checking that my program isn't passing me something null, so I catch it right there and my program errors out. So that's the list init method. It simply initializes our list. Okay, so in the next video, we are going to be working on how to get the beginning of the list. Okay, so now we're back again, and now what we're going to do is we're going to make a list method that will help us later on in our modularity to get us the beginning of the list. Not the head of the list, but the first element after the head. And so this is actually pretty easy, but the first thing we need to do is it needs to return a list element, and it's going to return a list element pointer. And we're going to say we're going to call it list begin, and it's going to take our list again. And simply it's going to return list head dot next. And so what this will do is it will give us the next element in the list. So the next element in the list will either be the tail or will be a node that actually contains information, which is pretty nice. So there you go. Okay guys, so now we're going to be making an insert method. And our insert method is going to work a little bit different than you may think so. The way our list element insert is going to work is it's going to take two things. It's going to take two list elements. It's going to take the list element you want to insert, and it's going to take the list element you want to insert before. So this is going to be an insert before method. And so instead of inserting after, we're going to insert before. So I'm going to give my two parameters, list element point, I'm going to call element, or no, we're going to call it before because that's the element we're going to insert before, and then my second parameter, which I'm put on a new line here, is going to be called list element pointer, and I'm going to call it element. So that's the element that's going to be inserted. So again, to recap, I am going to, whatever the first parameter, list element before, I'm going to insert lm, the second parameter, before my first parameter, which is named before. Kind of complicated. Maybe too complicated. So the way we do this is, I gotta stop saying is first of all, we are going to there's four conditions. We need to deal with the next and previous of element, and we need to deal with the next and previous of before. Or we need to deal with the previous of before and the next of the element that is in between where we're going to insert. So think of it as, so I have before element, so that's the element that's going to be after element, elem, after the insertion, but there's also something that's before elem that I need to now point to element because now it's pointing to before. I hope you guys get that. So then elem, so I'm going to set elem's next equal to before, and I'm going to set elem's previous equal to before previous, which is kind of nice. So now that I've done that, I need to set up how before is going to work. So I'm going to go before previous, and now the previous next is going to point to element, because I want the behind element to now be pointing to element, and now I want the previous of before to point to element. So now we kind of see that the elem is now correctly going to before and before previous, and then I have to make sure I do this afterwards. The last thing I should do is change before previous to now point to the element, so that these two conditions can now correctly change the nodes around it. So that's our insert method.